Yo, this hot, this the spot, there it is, pod.com. We're interviewing the best comedians, so tune in quick and get your ears receiving them. We talking about life and life to stream right to you, from the microphone right to your home, dude. Side note, this might get embarrassing, but no, don't sweat, yo, cause there it is.
Welcome to the There It Is podcast, a comedy podcast to help you find your inspiration. I'm your host, Jason Farr. Let's do this. Thanks so much for joining us. Very fun episode today. We have the nicest person in the world. No, not Lin-Manuel Miranda, though. Good guess. Would be great to have him on. It's just not who our guest is today. But our guest is Sarita Ekya. She is a good friend of mine and girlfriend of the show, Justina's. We met her in our level 2 class at the Magnet, and then we found out all of this interesting stuff about her. And Sarita and I talk about these interesting things and her experiences at the Magnet and working in the restaurant industry and being on Chopped, which she was on recently back in November or December. And it's a very fun chat. You're going to love this because she is such a joy-filled person. So let's just get right to it. Here's my chat with Sarita Ekya. Just for context, you and I met in level 2 at the Magnet.
Yep, July of 2017.
I can't believe it's been that long. But yeah, it was a while ago. And so we've known each other for a while and been friends for a while. And then after knowing you, I feel like a couple of years, then we find out about SMAC, your restaurant.
I'm really bad at self-promotion. I really should tell people about my restaurant like sooner into the friendship.
Yeah, I mean, we were thrilled when we found out about it because we love mac and cheese. And also for people who aren't in New York, SMAC it stands for Sarita's Mac and Cheese, a great mac and cheese restaurant. And it's in New York City. And is it in the East Village sort of area?
Yeah, you got it. Yep, exactly. Yeah. It's right in the East Village.
So there are just so many interesting things. Like, we had no idea. We didn't really know what you did, but then we find out that you did that. And we're like, oh, that's interesting. And then I find out that you have a degree in engineering. And then at some point I find out you're from Canada. So... there's all this stuff that's like, I don't see how one leads to the other. So let's find out. You started SMAC in 2005, so you were already here. When did you move to New York?
So SMAC was kind of the birth of SMAC came literally so soon after I moved to New York. I moved to New York July 31st, 2005. Mm-hmm. My husband and I were living in New Hampshire at the time, actually, and we moved to New York. I came up with the idea of SMAC shortly thereafter, within about a month, and then 9 months later, in June of 2006, SMAC was born. So it coincides very much with our landing in New York.
Yeah. And how did you decide to go into that line of work, since you do have a degree in engineering and had worked professionally as an engineer, right?
Yeah. So the reason my husband and I ended up in New York City was just because we love the city. And we specifically wanted to move to Manhattan at some point in our lives. Mm-hmm. We would visit here all the time. So we kind of just made that jump. We quit our engineering jobs. He's also an engineer. He's an electrical engineer, worked in software. I'm a mechanical engineer. I worked in the biomed field. And, we had nice jobs there, but the city was drawing us. So this is 2005. The job market's pretty good. So we quit our jobs in New Hampshire and roll on down to New York City, just anticipating that we'll get engineering jobs. So one of the things with that move, we promised each other that what we'll do is either we'll get new jobs or that we love, or if we don't love them, if we've run out of money, fine, we'll take the jobs, kind of thing. It was more of, we want to come to New York. We want to experience and enjoy New York as much as possible. And since we made this big move, we want to make sure we're making the right career choices at this point. And so we were both interviewing. We were both interviewing. He was on like a couple of offers at that point. I was on like some second, third interviews. And in parallel, we were also eating out like crazy because we just moved to New York. And it was, I was like thinking back to how many calories we consumed, but how much walking we were also doing, right? I was like, yes, I was just a tad younger back then. It was a little bit easier. But we were really enamored by the niche restaurants. And, we had luckily landed a sublet in the East Village. And to this day, 15 years later, 15 plus years later, we're still in the East Village. It's a neighborhood that, feels like I belong here. This is kind of my place.
Oh, yeah.
We just kind of got this lucky sublet here. We didn't really know one neighborhood from the other because until you live in New York, it's very hard to, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's the cool place to be, the East Village.
Yeah, it's interesting because now that I've been here this is our 16th year in the East Village, we've seen so much change. But when we moved here, people used to talk about how much it changed from the 80s until like the early 2000s So now I'm like, I'm kind of like a little bit of a long timer here now because I've seen so much change, but still super cool place to be. But one of the things the East Village had was these niche restaurants, and I had never seen that anywhere where, when I was living in Nova Scotia or in Manchester, New Hampshire, and now I'm in, the East Village of New York. And there are these, I was like, this place just sells dumplings, or this place just sells grilled cheese. Like, it was very shocking to me. It's shocking to someone who's coming from a much smaller place. And so my husband and I just started eating at all these niche restaurants. And we were at the Peanut Butter Company in the West Village, which is no longer there, but their peanut butter is sold pretty much in every grocery store across North America, I feel like. And we were eating our PB&J sandwiches, and I said to him, wouldn't it be great if there was a place that did PB&J grilled cheese? Because we had just gone to a grilled cheese place, and mac and cheese. Mac and cheese. That's the next restaurant we're eating at, is the solely mac and cheese restaurant. And lo and behold, there wasn't one. We started searching around. We were on Chowhound. This is 2005, not everyone has smartphones.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of Yelp or apps, but Chowhound was a big message board and the kind of the dominant food board back then. And everyone was kind of chattering about mac and cheese, but not a mac and cheese place because there wasn't one.
Right.
And they were talking about, I love going to this place because of this mac and cheese, or I love going to this place. And I'm like, this is a really good business idea. And we were kind of in that change phase, right? We had quit our jobs, which felt risky at the time because they were secure jobs, or what you'd like to think are secure jobs, and moved to New York City. So we're like, this is just something. This is kind of like our aha moment. Maybe we should just run with it. And we both couldn't shelve it. It was in the forefront of our minds every day. And that's it. We knew we wanted to own our own business eventually. We just thought it would be in the engineering world because that's what we were trained at and that's what we knew. But instead we kind of went with this, and literally 9 months later we opened up SMAC. So that's very fast. If you talk to anyone in the food industry, we'd be talking to people and they're like, that's really I'm like, fast? I feel like I should get this done in 3 to 6 months because I was a project manager in my engineering life, right? So I'm like, okay, if I have this all lined up, that's just not how it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how SMAC came to be.
Wow. And it's led to some fun things. Obviously, the restaurant is beloved, but also you're kind of fresh off of a stint on Chopped.
Yeah, that was
on that. And it was, you had, and you were in 2 episodes.
Correct, yeah.
And in one of them, or maybe both of them, it was comfort food. So you were using mac and cheese. You were bringing mac and cheese to the table a couple of times.
Yeah, so it was a comfort food feud, and I was competing in the mac and cheese episode, and then I went on to the finals, which was just the overall theme was comfort food. This food feud ends with me. So I knew if I made it to the finals, I'd really have to push some boundaries because mac and cheese. So basically my specialties in life are Indian food. I'm East Indian, and I grew up with my mom's homemade cooking, which is amazing. And then I have a mac and cheese restaurant. So those are kind of my 2 niche food groups, right? So when I went on the mac and cheese episode, I'm like, okay, I could do this. But then I knew if I went on to the finals for comfort food, I would have to pull from other hats, pull some other tricks out, right? Because it's now expanding kind of what's expected of me.
It was fun to watch. I had known of the show, but I'd never watched it. And when I heard that you were on, I said, well, I have to watch it. So it was interesting to see, but also not quite the version that they normally do, I imagine, since this was recorded or filmed during COVID. you had some intense COVID protocols to follow in order to be a part of it, and they were shooting it outside to make it a little safer. And it was fun to see you on there and to see you bring your light to Food Network and the people who watch it across the globe.
Thank you. It was one of those things where I tell people when they had approached me to be on it, and my initial reaction was no. I'm not doing this. It's people are like, what? Because they're like, what? You're outgoing. This is what you do. I'm like, I'm like, yeah, but it's the competition part. Like that's just not my style. And I had seen episodes before, like just kind of one-offs, and it's super intense. It's also just very much like, you really have to sell yourself. And like I said at the beginning, I'm just not good at self-promotion, right? Like, it's not like I'm like, yeah, this is who I am. So when they asked me to be on it, and I kind of pushed back, and then they talked to me, and they're like, no, we want you on it. Especially we're doing a mac and cheese episode. I'm like, okay, how can I say no? This is ridiculous for me to say no. But I was like, I still have to I'm going to be my authentic self on this, as much as I can. And that was kind of the beautiful thing, is that it really was, it's intense. There's so much reality based to it, but at the same time, you do get to be yourself. You don't have to create this personification of you. It's
right.
This is who I am, and this is how I'm getting through this competition.
Yeah, and I have a question about that because I may have seen clips of that show, or maybe it was like Iron Chef or something. But that music, they make it so intense. They make it feel like it's the most stressful thing ever. And then, like, meanwhile, this person is icing a cake. And it's like, well, that's not a stressful activity.
Right.
Is it as intense filming it as it appears watching it?
So I was super intense watching my own episodes, and I was laughing at that, right? And I was like, oh, wow, they've really created this, of like, everyone's like, but what happens? I'm like, I know, but it's just the culmination of the end product. It just makes you so tense.
The clock here is really getting to me. Trying to do all of this in 20 minutes is a tough challenge.
So personally, I feel like it's more intense leading up to your cooking sessions than actually in the cooking sessions. Yeah, it gets a little crazy. You cut yourself, you do this, but for me personally, I'm in the zone. I'm in my zone. I know what I want to accomplish, so I kind of tune everything else out around me. I was doing that a lot for the mac and cheese episode. Then once I got to the finals, got a little looser. But it was more intense for that period of watching the show, as opposed to my intensity on set was in between, before actually the actual cooking, because it's like you can kind of psych yourself out, right? Or you're like thinking about 1,000 things. But once you're in it, all you're focused on is what you want to accomplish. So I feel like the stress kind of folds away because you're so focused. But watching the show, all you're focusing on is the intensity of the show. Right? So watching it, yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think that it is more intense watching the full show than it is actually in participating in the show.
Okay. Well, it also, like, every once in a while, and this I found a little annoying, the judges would start shouting, like, oh, are you making a $25,000 pizza?
Chef Sarita, how are you bringing the comfort food home?
Myself a poutine going on over here.
These plates have got to be worth $25K. Everything you do today has to be worth $25K.
It's like, well, it's like one out of several things they're going to cook to win 25. So it really just has to be like 1/6 of $25,000.
Right.
It doesn't have to be worth $25,000 in and of itself. No, but they kept shouting that, and it's like, guys, come on. You don't have to say anything.
I think, it's one of those things where you're watching it laughing, because also so much of what the judges are saying to you and the banter going on between contestants it doesn't make the cut of the show, right? Because there's just so much going on. They can only show so much. So I think that's the charm as a contestant that gets lost, because that's not what necessarily everyone wants to see on TV, right? So it's the intensity, but there's so much awesome like banter or fun stuff going on between the judges and like positive stuff too, but they're going to edit it to show what they're screaming at you to get things done. Also, Chopped apparently is the longest running cooking show. So they've got their system down to a T as to why people are going to tune in, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think also when the judges were also giving you feedback, it's like people are like, "Oh my gosh, that judge was so hard." I'm like, "Yeah, but you didn't hear the other positive things they said too, because
Right,
they
they
need to
edited that
keep
out.
people on the edge of the seat, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it was definitely fun to watch you on there, watch you do your thing. And I was like, man, when this pandemic is over, I hope people are like, not putting you out of business, they're going so much, but because some places do get slammed, like when Oprah mentions it, and it's like the company can't withstand the attention. But
that happened to us in 2007. Actually, we had a blip on Oprah, and it was insane at our restaurant for like a month.
Talk about that. I did not see this in my research.
This is.
I love macaroni and cheese. I honestly don't even remember how I heard about this place. I can't decide, guys, what to do. So could I just maybe get 3 different kinds? Okay, this is the poor cheese. Lord have mercy. This is the one with the figs. I wanted to try this. Figs and macaroni. Gruyere and the bacon, also very good. You cannot go wrong with the all-American pork cheese. And you throw in a little burger meat, too. Heaven.
Yeah, this is super, like, this is so long ago. We opened in 2006, and in December 2007, Gail King had come to SMAC. She picked like 3 or 4, no, actually probably about 4 or 5 different places in New York that were her favorite places. Like Central Park, where it's like SMAC and Central Park. We're like, we're like in a competition with Central Park. So we're like, well, this is unbelievable. Actually, when I got the phone call, it was September of 2007. I got the phone call, and it was someone saying they were from Oprah Winfrey, and it was a Chicago area code. This is landline days, right? Chicago area code. And I was in the middle of a lunch rush, and it was when I was working like crazy days. And I was like, okay, can I take your name and number? I'll call you back. And so when I called them back, I'm so glad I didn't say this, but I literally thought it was like one of my friends messing with me, right? So because I said before, my dream would be if, SMAC ever got on Oprah, right? I'd always say that. Uh-huh. And I was going to call them and like give them shit, right? Like what like, what, you think this is funny? This is not a funny joke, right? So I called very nicely. I'm like, oh, this is actually the Oprah show who's calling, and that Gail is going to come film at our restaurant. It was crazy. So it was just a very short blip. They showed myself and my husband behind the counter, Gail trying some food. And then they aired it when my husband and I were on vacation in Nova Scotia in December.
Oh, wow.
And they weren't supposed to air it at that time, and they gave us like very little notice, and he had to fly back right away because it was insanity. We couldn't keep up with the business. People were getting upset. It was so stressful for a good straight month plus. Like literally, they say that no press is bad press. I mean, this was amazing to be on it, but at the same time, it just, you don't want to piss your customers off. Like you don't want to, right? We were running out of food. People were waiting hours. Like it was. It's
insane. I have heard that a couple of different things happen when Oprah says, like, here's one of my favorite things. And it's whatever kind of business it is, whether it's a restaurant or they make something or whatever. And because people have a heads up that they're going to get that attention from Oprah, what people started to do after hearing about situations like yours, but also situations that were even worse where the companies had to go out of business because they just couldn't withstand. So what they did was they hired a bunch of extra people to do the extra work that they were expecting. But then things didn't blow up like it did for other people.
Right.
And then that puts them in the hole. And maybe even some people went out of business for that. And so it was a sort of dicey thing where it's like, I mean, like you said, no press is good press. Right? However, like you could put yourself in a bad position if you get this attention. It's, and that's one of the things. I mean, I'm not a business person, but when people talk about big companies versus like a mom and pop, and they'll say like, oh, these big companies, they're doing all this stuff. It's like they they have the capacity to, and the mom and pop places don't have the capacity to.
Yeah.
And we want these mom and pop places to have that success, have this big success, but they don't have the capacity that the big places do to put just like have the hands and the feet to do the work. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
I don't even know what the balance should be sometimes. I want people to live comfortably, you know,
Yeah.
at
Right.
least,
Yeah.
at least, you know, I don't want them to
Yeah.
feel like they have to struggle. But, you know, sometimes I guess that's just like what's in the cards. Like they're gonna just always be grinding just to live their life because they
Yeah.
don't have the position to hire a bunch of people to do all this work, whether they
Yeah,
get
yeah.
Oprah's attention or not.
Exactly. And I think it's just, it lends itself to one of those things where you're not in a position or you just don't have that infrastructure. For
Right.
us back in 2007, our restaurant was 600 square feet, like our original space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even now our restaurant's like just under 1,000. So there's only so much you can accomplish. I was actually shocked when we first built out our kitchen and we were, that was a first, we never done that before. And I think the engineering did come in handy, but just talking to people like, wow, what you can accomplish in like 150 square feet is ridiculous. Like it really is just, and we actually made the mistake of when we opened a second location in the Murray Hill neighborhood, we made that way bigger and it was actually eating up our speed because of the walking time. It wasn't like it was this huge kitchen, but it was so much different than our East Village kitchen that like the walking time of going from the oven to plating it to getting it to the customer, like, we never thought that this would actually affect it because it wasn't, again, like you wouldn't look at it from the outside and go, that's a giant kitchen, but comparatively it was 4 times the size of our East Village kitchen.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it does take an engineer brain to recognize that sort of thing. Yeah, but wow, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Well, speaking of engineer brain and comedy, I have noticed that there are a lot of engineers who get into and thrive with improv comedy. And I'm interested how you ended up getting into comedy. I've never figured out why so many engineers gravitate towards it, but maybe we can discover that. But why did you decide to get into it?
So my personal journey into improv, it started so late in my life. I did a free class at Magnet early 2017 and then got hooked right away. But my dabble into it was literally, I was 17 and I was in drama in high school. And my English teacher had actually invited this improv troupe into our very small classroom, just to put on a show for like 20, 25 minutes. And they had to ask for a volunteer at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And I put my hand up, they picked me. And then they kept me on for almost the whole thing because I was having so much fun with it. And afterwards, they came over to me like, we don't usually do that, but it was just so much fun. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I was so energized. I felt like electric that day. I just felt so good. And my English teacher came up to me afterwards and she was like, oh my gosh, Sarita, that was the most awesome thing I've ever seen. Like it was just this energy. And and then I shelved it. I was like, oh, that was cool. That was so awesome. But I never forgot what that felt like. I never did. And it was one of those things where I had just done, many more years of like drama and plays and more traditional theater that when I moved to New York, my husband actually bought me some theater classes. And I just kind of gravitated towards that because that's what I had done in the past. I'd only done this very small 15 to 20 minute blip of improv, but it was still in there. And then I met a bunch of theater people from this class and a few of them were actually doing improv at the time. Some at the Tank, some at the Magnet. And one of my good friends she just, constantly on social media talking about the Magnet. And I was like, whatever happened to that idea in my head that I do improv again? Now, this is like, I'm talking like 20, almost 25 years later in my life, right? That I'm thinking about it again. I'm like, something's up. I need to just do this. So then a friend of mine and I went to the free class. I walked away. I'm like, okay, when are we signing up? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, when are we? Like, I almost had that same feeling as when I was 18. Now I'm like, I'm 42 and I still remember that, like this is a long time coming. And so she couldn't get her schedule together. I'm like, listen, I just have to do it now. And she's like, yeah, don't wait for me. Just do it. And then she decides that she was going to take a different road anyhow. So I started the classes at the Magnet and I've never looked back, the community. I mean, right. We could talk about the Magnet community for days straight, hours at least, like just what a great place to be. It was almost nice that my friend had vetted, this friend of mine from theater had vetted all these other improv schools, and she just was so high on the Magnet. And I was like, okay, this is the place for me to be. And then just the classes have been amazing, and just getting involved in the community as a whole. That's been so. It's been such a good part of my life, like my own thing. And it's interesting. So you ask about a lot of engineers getting into comedy. I'm not so sure why, but I can see it just because engineering is so structured. There's so much of engineering is structured, right? It's very much, yes, you get to be creative. Yes, you get to be imaginative, but within certain boundaries a lot of the time. Unless you're like a design engineer that's really, you're working on something very, up and coming or something. Just you've been given this leeway by your team to do like fun and fancy things, but otherwise, like you're kind of fitting things into boxes, and you need to work the other side of your brain, and you need to be creative. And, I think as humans, we all crave that. So I think that's probably a big draw for engineers who actually make it to the step of getting there and trying it. And then once they try it, it's like, oh, something's, switch is just turned on in my brain that feels like it hasn't been triggered since I was like in art class in grade 3 or something, right? So I think that's why engineers are drawn to it. I think for me, a lot of it, there was so much more at this point in my life. Like my husband and I running the restaurant together. We have 2 kids. I felt like I didn't ever have my own thing. This was my thing, something that he wasn't going to do. He will support me and watch me, and I can be out of the house as much to do it, but he wasn't going to do it. So I was like, I need my own thing in life right now, and that was a big deal. He's also doing his master's in cognitive neuroscience. That's his thing, right? So it's like, you do you, I do me. They're completely different. So that, and I think that it's funny because as I started getting more involved in the Magnet, like I'd be out of the house like multiple times a week, and the kids would be like, "Mama, you're going out again?" I'm like, "Yep, this is Mama time, and I'm out of here."
And your kids are so sweet.
Oh, thank you.
You did a Mother's Day show with your oldest.
Yes,
and
I can't wait till we can do that again.
I mean, the whole crowd was really, really into that show. Like he warmed their hearts. He is such a sweet kid. Both of them.
Those comments, like honestly, the comments that came from our Magnet Theater Community Facebook group, I was reading them to him, and I was almost in tears. People were just so endearing and lovely, and anding my son, and that meant the world to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it really is. You mentioned how long we could talk about the community, and the community is so wonderful. I mean, it's no surprise that there are so many people at Magnet who started reaching out to say, oh, wow, and how great was that?
Right.
Like it was, it's obviously just no surprise. And I was also like one of those people saying that in the comments, but still, like... it was sincere. Everyone everyone who I've interacted with who has met your family loves them. They're so immediately endearing.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, these kids we've been closer than ever the past year at home in COVID, right? In our 1,000 square foot apartment. But I at the end of the day, even those days where I'm just like, oh, I need a little more space, I count myself very blessed. They're good kids. They're easy kids. They've, I think the big thing is like my husband and I are on the same page with pretty much everything. And if we aren't, we figure that out, so it really translates to how we're raising the kids. And for us, it's like, I just want to raise good people. That's what I just want. You just want to be good, kind people. Everything else will fall into place then. Just be good, kind people.
Yeah. And you've done so much with the community at Magnet. I mean, you're someone that everyone knows, I feel like, and everyone sees you and stuff. And whether that's in the crowd or on the stage, like people are very familiar with who you are because you're always involved at the Magnet. And I think that was part of why we were so surprised when we found out about SMAC, because it's like, how does she have the time to do all of the things that she's doing? But you have, like last year, a year ago, right before COVID hit, you took on the role of being a diversity scholarship. I don't know the exact title offhand, but you were leading.
I guess the coordinating,
of the diversity scholarship, which many theaters do. But for people who don't know, what a lot of comedy theaters do is they offer a diversity scholarship. Sometimes it's per class. Sometimes it's a full ride. At the Magnet, it's a full ride. And that means you get all of the classes for free if you get picked. And you are coordinating the application process and the process choosing who the scholars will be, we'll call them, the people who will receive the scholarship. And can we talk a little bit about why a scholarship like that even exists?
So, also I have to give out my props to you, Jason, for being part of the team for the diversity scholarship.
Team, yeah.
Our team is amazing. It's interesting because it's such an important question, because right now, we live in New York City. We live in probably one of the most diverse cities in the world. Mm-hmm. And you go to comedy shows, you go to any shows, but let's focus on, you go to comedy shows, and we're still seeing the majority, even in the heart of New York City, you're still seeing on stage the majority of performers are white males. Mm-hmm. Do I have anything against white males? No, of course not. No. But guess what? That is not representative of our population in New York City.
Right.
So this is it. It's like one of those things where you're like, okay, what's happening here? And you dig a little deeper, and you're like, all right, opportunities just aren't being presented and available to people of color, to minority groups, to people aren't even sometimes aware of what's out there, even when opportunities are there, Mm-hmm. So this is the importance of the diversity scholarship, just to get people and voices heard on stage that not only represent where you live, but different voices too, right? It's like, if I go back to Manchester, New Hampshire, I don't want to see performances of just white males as well. I want to see a diverse cast, because that is the only way we are going to be able to step into other people's shoes and it make a emotional impact, which then I feel like travels forward with you in life. You remember how you felt. Like I said, I remember how I felt when I was 17 years old doing that 15 minutes of improv. I will never forget that feeling, right? Yeah. That's in me. So I think this is the same thing, is the more people and the more voices we hear and learn from, just make us better people to carry forward, and maybe to help educate, or at least influence, talk about with other people.
I agree. And, there's so much to it. There's so many reasons why it's better. For one, as an audience member, when I've seen a show, or even as a performer, when I've been in a show with a diverse cast, there's always something that's said that I wouldn't have thought of. There are always several things, if it's a very diverse show, there's several things that I just wouldn't have thought of, and they will surprise me, and I'll be delighted in them, and I'll get a huge laugh from it, because it's something that's I couldn't have seen coming. So it ends up being, that's such a crucial part of comedy, is the surprise at the end. And
yes.
If it's just someone who thinks like me up there, then there are going to be less surprises. But also, I want people who are like me on stage. Obviously, everyone should have representation of themselves on stage, because then there is that camaraderie that you experience from that. And then also, it's just great for everyone to experience different voices and different kinds of people, not just from the standpoint of like, hey, this is a surprise I wasn't expecting, but you can hear something from someone that that is wise, that you wouldn't have come to a conclusion of on your own. And that is beneficial to everyone. This isn't, I think one of the problems, and I haven't heard this at Magnet, but one of the problems when people talk about diversity is they think it's some sort of anti-white men or anti-white people sort of thing. And it's not that. It's pro everybody. We want to see everybody and hear everybody's voices. And it's also good for each individual person, whether that person is black or white or Indian or Pakistani or whoever they are, to hear other voices and also experience their own from other people in their community. So it's just good all round for everybody. It isn't anti anyone. It's pro everyone.
Exactly. And this is the thing. It's pro everyone, but right now we just don't see enough of everyone, which then, takes us back to why we have the need for the diversity scholarship.
Exactly. And that scholarship, we just did a round of that just so people know, because I'm sure someone is listening is like, well, then I want that scholarship. We, because of COVID, it threw things off very much. We were going into this process. I did interviews with some applicants the day the training center shut down. Yep. I was one of the last people to step foot in the training center, which is now not our training center because COVID. But I was there for that. And we just finished that process almost a year later. So the next round will be in a while. Just be on the lookout. We'll let you know. It's not happening in the next couple months.
We're playing a little bit of catch up from 2020, but the positive thing is that we are moving forward. It's in this time of uncertainty and unknowing things. So I think this is a positive. We are moving forward.
What sort of advice would you give other theaters? Because I know that there are people from other theaters listening, and they care about diversity, but they're a little stumped on how to reach out and approach people to bring them in. What sort of advice would you give if we are talking like doing a scholarship sort of thing?
Kind of in line with the scholarship, but not. It's more so like the diversity initiative, and just thinking about it in larger terms is one thing that's been brought up at the Magnet and is changing now, and I think has been slowly changing, but now there's more of a push for it, is just having more diversity in instructors too. So I don't know if you've noticed this, Jason, but there's been a lot of electives that have been kind of popping up from people teaching classes online that come from diverse backgrounds. And I think that's a really good way to get people to come into, because when you see someone that maybe, I'm Indian. If I see someone who's Indian who's running a sketch course or something, I'm like, hey, that's kind of interesting. That it might make me more inclined to even sign up for that, right? So I think other theaters also can look at that, bringing in some more classes taught by diverse instructors. I think the Magnet's doing a wonderful job of that right now, especially I think the online is lending itself to that too, because it's not someone who definitely has had to have gone, they can have like a niche strength and teach on that in an elective scenario, as opposed to, the basics of improv or musical improv or sketch. There's certain things. And the Magnet now is definitely diving deep into some of these more senior people who've taken classes who want to teach. So I think that's a big starting point for other theaters too. I think it's like get people on board to do those things, and then you'll probably start naturally attracting some more diverse students. Also for us, it's the scholarship. So I joined in helping with a scholarship probably the third year into it, I think it was. And over time it builds more of a following, but really just social media can be our friend and foe, but in this case, it's your friend. Just getting that word out there, like this is what we're offering. There's so many, improv and sketch groups on Facebook that just getting like, you know what, I feel like once things are, the community is large but small, right? It's one of those things where we hear right away what's happening, but there's so many people involved. Just because anyone who's really interested in the community is plugged in to one of these networks online. So just getting that word out. I also think that it's not something, it should definitely be planned out, but I know that if you dive in and if it's just offering, you know, a class at a time or something, it doesn't have to be this daunting whole process of a scholarship, or it's more of like, at least get your feet wet and start doing it. And then you'll figure out your process along the way.
Yeah. And there's so much to it. I mean, and you're saying all of this, but you know, we were talking about, like, you know, we see a lot of white men, but it's also like young, you know, like a lot of young white people. And we also want to see older people on stage, and we also want to see LGBTQ on stage, and have all of those voices in there. And a lot of people feel marginalized in different areas. And so it's not just about race. It's about, like, who's out in the world who is just underrepresented on our stage.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of groups that we need to see more of. There's no doubt about that. You know, you're talking about age, we're talking about race, we're talking about disability.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
you're right. There's a lot. And again, it's not going to be something where we can fix in 1 year. You know, we get so many. You know, we've reviewed so many wonderful applicants. We want to give scholarships to all of them. It just, you know, that's not possible. But
it's so hard because you do want to say yes to everyone.
You want to say yes to everyone. Like, I woke up this morning going, "Oh, I wish that we could have just given this many more." Right? But
I know, right?
But I think we all did. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not an easy process, really. I mean, I'm not trying to say, like, woe is me here, but I just mean, when we're going through applications and interviews, it would be so much easier if people were jerks, but they're all lovely.
Right, I know.
You know, they all have something to give, and it's like,
Yes.
Yeah, it's also, I know that some theaters, too, are saying, like, well, how do we reach out to these different groups? Would you say, because this is what I'm thinking, would you say that even just putting out there that there's a scholarship and people can apply will draw a lot of people from different walks of life?
I think it does. We've talked about that too. Like, how do we get into communities that maybe aren't even in any kind of improv scene or have friends in improv scene? So we haven't taken that step yet, I would say, because we get so many applicants as it is in the improv acting world, or friends of friends in the improv acting world. But I think that as this grows, as we sure hope it does, we can start thinking about that, like thinking about, okay, how do we bring improv to communities that haven't been exposed to it, that haven't, you know, I don't really know much about it, or maybe have, like, heard of whose line is it anyway, or something, you know, something. But I think that is definitely part of, like, the ethos of Magnet, which makes me love it so much, is that, you know, Armando, who's, you know, one of the original founders of the theater, his ethos is that everyone can do improv, right? And I just, as soon as I learned that, I'm like, this is it. Like, this is the place that I'm supposed to be, because this is the belief, and we know that we know it to be true. Like, I think you and I can both agree. You know, you've seen people who have been fearful of public speaking, or just have, like, the most timid and quiet voice, and they get on stage and they do it. They come to a mixer, they do a scene, and you're just like, yes, everyone can do improv. We improvise every day, daily in our lives, right?
We do, yeah. And we all played as kids, so we know how to make believe.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's so nice to see those people have those moments when they go from being a little shy or timid to just opening up. It's always, like, such a nice, beautiful thing to see, because you see confidence growing in them, and you see them, how the fun of getting a laugh and joking around with somebody, opening them up, is such a great thing.
It
You
really
see it a lot
is.
in level 1.
You do. And I feel like when you compare like the first couple weeks of level 1 to the show, when you get down to your show in level 1, you're like, wow, there was growth here.
For sure. Well, this has been a great chat. We've now reached the end. It's time to create something together. I always like to create something with the guest, and it's usually based on what we've been talking about. And that could be anything. And an idea I have, unless you want to do something more improv based, I had the idea of what if we were going to create a new restaurant, what it would be. Like, what could we make if we were going to make a restaurant? And maybe you already have something where you're like, I wish I could do this, as well as SMAC. But how would, obviously with your process with creating SMAC, you were saying like a lot of people are talking about mac and cheese, but there isn't a place devoted to mac and cheese. So if I were to apply that sort of approach, I would say hot dogs. Because, there are a lot of hot dog vendors on the side of the street.
Right.
But, not always the best hot dog.
Right. Yes.
I come from the South where, like, people really do like, the chili a certain way. Like, there's a certain way to go about hot dogs. So that'd be one idea I had. But what are you thinking?
For the longest time, my husband and I we loved the fact of doing like authentic Indian street food. Because whenever we go to there's a lot of restaurants that will have like an appetizer or whatnot, but it's not like there's places in India like on the roadside called dhabas. But they're actually like usually full meals, but it's quick. It's like when you're in transit, you go and like there's like a couple tables set up, and the food is delicious. It's fresh, it's delicious. They're highly trafficked, so it's like you're getting everything fresh. But we were more thinking of like a street side, a snack dhaba type thing, because there's not a whole lot of places that do an assortment of Indian street food. It's like you'll maybe get so there's kati roll places, they specialize in those. That there's like you'll go to other Indian restaurants and they'll have some appetizers. But I'm like, if you had just like this plethora of all this snacky Indian food, oh my gosh, like I'm getting hungry thinking about it. But that's one idea. That's definitely one idea that's been in the back of our minds for a while. I mean, my mom makes the best chicken curry and rice. We're always like, you know what? If you just had a place that sold like, different like chicken curry and rice and maybe one other thing, I bet you like you would have a following, because if you just did it well, right?
Right. Well, I like that better than hot dogs because there are at least a couple of hot dog places. But what you're speaking to, there is more of a dearth of that in the market here in New York. So when you go about trying to put that together, like let's just look at it from maybe a marketing standpoint, like naming the place. How do you come up with, now obviously yours, Sarita's Mac and Cheese, you said SMAC. Was that the first idea, or did you throw out a bunch of things?
No, so I've always been like an acronym gal. So I've acronymized a lot of things in my life. And so when we first started talking about a mac and cheese place, and I'm like, hey, Caesar, we can call it SMAC, short for Sarita's Macaroni and Cheese. Like, really? Because at the time, I shouldn't say at the time, but it's closer to the time of the East Village being the drug haven of New York City. Yeah, so Tompkins Square Park, we're talking like late 80s, this is the place. So we're just like, we're not that far from like people still remembering that. Yeah. But I was like, but it's an acronym for my name and mac and cheese. And over time, kids would be like, SMAC must mean it's just so delicious. Smack my lips. And I'm like, that's what it means. Whatever. But then you'd get like the old time East Villagers going, oh yeah, get some SMAC. The names worked out really well for us. But that's kind of like, I would definitely lean towards something catchy. Like it'd have to be like something like that had some Indian snack or something, a word like a kind of I'm trying to think of it'd have to have or maybe like some kind of Hindi word or some kind of like just fun sound, a word sound. Yeah.
And what did you say that
of our new restaurant? Are we doing this?
Yeah, let's try. Let's figure this out. What did you say the name of it? Is it like how do you
I got the name.
Oh, whoa.
I got it. We could call it Papad. Pappad. That is an Indian, it's like a chip. It's an Indian chip, and you could have an exclamation point at the end of it. Papad. Now, the thing is, people would call it Papad, so we'd have to somehow figure out how to spell it. But it's perfect because we could have a logo with that crunch of the chip. I don't know. I think it's good.
What did you say the name of the street vending is? Is it?
The Dhaba.
Dhaba.
So it's Dhaba, and there's a restaurant in Murray Hill already called Dhaba.
Okay.
It's actually quite delicious, but it's a full-on restaurant. You know, it's like they've got like the whole meal deal there.
That's a fun name, Dhaba.
It is. It is a fun name.
What's the correct pronunciation of
It'd be
this new?
Papad.
Papad.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely. We could figure out. There's something there, though. There's definitely something that could be worked in there.
Well, nice. Well, there it is. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Sarita.
Thanks, Jason. It's a pleasure, always. I love seeing your face. Can't wait till we can, embrace in person.
I can't either. Isn't she great? She's like, you know how mac and cheese is comfort food? It brightens your day. Well, that's what Sarita is. Sarita herself is a comfort to the world, and I am so thankful to know her. If you want to check out more about SMAC, you can go to eatsmac.com. You can also follow them on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at eatsmac. And I know that they have frozen mac and cheese. I don't know if they mail it nationwide, so go to eatsmac.com so you can find out if you can. And also, when all of this is behind us, go to SMAC when you come to New York. Please visit. And please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at ThereItIsPod. Until next time, be good to each other.
The music for the theme song was created by Neil Brooks. The rap was written and performed by Nick Acevedo. The logo for There It Is was created by Jeff Prater. The There It Is podcast is produced by Jason Farr.